which practices, spiritual practices, which practices help you the most to walk this path of your life?
Good question. You know, in the work, the work of Jwala and Alice Bailey, it talks about the importance of meditation, study, and service as being the three things that every student must do: to meditate, to practice some kind of a service to humanity, you know. So these are very important. I began what's been a lifelong meditation practice from my 20s to this morning, all the way through. I've tried to engage in service, with my main service being with clients, helping them, and also teaching groups, and literally being in the classroom is a way. Teaching has been an important, you know, pathway for me. I think for a psychologist, and I'd say this to Maxime as well, for the counselor or psychologist to just simply remember that they are in fact a soul, and that the person or people they're sitting with to do counseling with are also souls. And with that in mind, to try and reach into the higher realm while counseling, before counseling, after counseling, to remember to reach toward the higher realm, the spiritual realm. The practice of dream work has been very important to me as an individual, but also in my counseling work. I've done a lot of dream work with the people that I work with, and I've followed my own dreams. I found that I got a great deal of guidance from the higher self in the dream state, and a lot of precognition, getting hints about things that were going to happen. With regard to counseling, getting information that would be helpful to my clients through the dream state. Sometimes when I got to know them well, I would share if I had a dream. On more than one occasion, they would say that, "That's interesting, I had the same dream last night," or "I've been thinking about the same thing," that we were sharing together in the higher state of consciousness together. We were not so separate, but more walking together, if that makes sense to you. So paying attention to dreams, developing a meditative practice. I would teach my clients and my students the Soham meditation, and very, very helpful, particularly with anxiety, but and generically speaking, the Soham meditation is a very powerful technique. And both in the pranayama, the breathing, also in visualization, and in the understanding of what you are doing when you're practicing the Soham technique, what's literally going on. So, okay, a lot of words, but maybe that helps a little bit. So,
I have a question that that is nagging me. Well, so I heard you mentioning the reality of the soul, which is, I mean, we will certainly not discuss its existence. I mean, it's really pretty self-evident in all sphere. You know, if you read Bailey and if you drop the soul part, I don't know what you are left with. But when you have patients who have no clue about there being a soul and they just identify with the, you know,
sure.
the lower part.
Sure.
How do you approach them, and how do you approach the soul reality in order not to try to indoctrinate them or?
Mm-hmm. Never. You just start with where they're at. Just start with where they're at. And you may never, it's possible you would never, ever bring up anything spiritual with them. It's also possible, I'm going to say something to you in particular, Maxime, it's a little, I'll say a little spooky. As you start to work with people, your own level of spiritual development, your own soul infusion, as it's called by Dracul, will have the tendency to spark the spiritual tendency in the other person. So it's not uncommon that the process begins strictly at the personality level. And again, I'm using terms that are both psychosynthesis and are also Dracul's teaching, both. Beginning at the personality level, but then somehow over time, if you have time, developing toward the soul and them starting to have a spark ignited inside of them. Maybe that won't happen at all. And that's just fine. So always starting and accepting people where they're at on the ladder of evolution. Where are they? And what their task is, you might say too, what is their task in this lifetime? And it may be to experience marriage and learning from marriage. It may be the karmic task of when you steal and rob and do bad things to other people, that there are consequences, also known as the law of karma. And you may never call it that, but that's what they're learning, to learn a karmic lesson, and that's what they're doing. You can always send them light and love, always. They can be an awful human being that you don't even like. You don't like everybody you're sitting with, and that's the truth of it. They may not be a nice person to be around. They just simply might not. But you still do your best to hold them in a higher consciousness as much as you can. Many years ago, I was sitting with a woman, and this is someone I did like very much as a person. We were working on the loss of her grandmother. My grandmother died, and she was very sad, somewhat depressed about her grandmother's death. And so I did a guided imagery with her, which I frequently do. And so we were out in a boat together, and we were rowing the boat as she would with her grandmother. So I led her to have a conversation with her grandmother, who had just passed away, and telling grandmother how much she missed her, how much she meant to her in her life, etc. Okay. At the same time, and I didn't say a word to the client, not one word. I'm sitting there visualizing the golden energy of the heart chakra coming out of my heart and surrounding her in love, and feeling my love and compassion for her and her loss of her grandma and how she felt. We finished up the guided imagery, and slowly, of course, and then she opened her eyes, and her eyes got big. And she looked at me and she said, "My God, the room is filled with golden light, and it's all coming out of your heart." Now, I had not said one word to her about what I was doing, sitting opposite her, not one word. But she had this breakthrough, and she, through the third eye, could see the energy of love as coming through the heart chakra and surrounding her with golden light. That's the soul's energy, the soul's light. So you never know. You never know. And so working with somebody and their issue in that case is depression and loss and grief. And not saying a word about what you're doing spiritually, other than working with imagery, which has a spiritual component for sure. Okay. So being with the client, trying to be compassionate, being a really good listener as much as you can, And again, accepting that you're not going to like everybody, and that's the truth of the matter. You know, as you work with people that are lawbreakers and, you know, convicts and people in prison or just out of prison, yeah, they're not always so likable. But you do what you can. So,
And did you never, as you was working in the academic field or in the university, and during your career, you never felt the judgment of the society, of the clients, or because this use of spirituality or spiritual tools, spiritual practices, did you never felt the challenge or the judgment of people for that?
I worked for 17 years in a Catholic university. I'll do what I call a sidebar, like the attorney does a sidebar. They pull you aside a little bit and have a sidebar conversation. My sidebar was that I had to deal with my past life feelings and experiences with the Catholic Church and my own background of having been both a priest and also being on the wrong end of the Inquisition long time ago. And so being at a Catholic university, I had to deal with those issues. But I also realized that I was with people that didn't necessarily believe the same things I did. But both the students, the other administrators, I think they could feel that I was on a spiritual track and that they liked that because in their own way, they were trying to be spiritual as well, if that makes sense to you. And so I got opportunities to teach and to do things, to introduce ideas that were spiritually oriented. I probably hardly ever use the word soul. Hardly ever. But, you know, I would, through their terms as Catholics, try and introduce ideas and help them to, how they understood Christianity and Jesus and so on, what their understanding was, and work with them. Again, I used a lot of guided imagery in my work at the Catholic University. And that was quite helpful. Working guided imagery, when it really works, taps into the unconscious mind and the higher self. And so a lot of issues would come up for these largely Catholic people. And then I could work with whatever came up for them, you know, in their lives and their work. So, yeah. So that's, yeah. They accepted me. In this case, even though I was not Catholic, they accepted me for the most part pretty well.
I have another question about people's reaction towards your spiritual pedigree. What about the other psychologists? And you are a member of 2 boards of psychologists, one in, I think, Oregon, and the other is California. And I mean, sometimes, and well, I just affiliated to the board of psychologists in Quebec, Montreal. And I mean, they're giving a lot of pressure to conform into the framework of what a good psychologist could be. How was your interaction with the other psychologists, and maybe those who are not so spiritually oriented?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you are probably very aware of, Maxime, what has occurred in psychology in the last 20 years is actually a pretty big surprise. The whole subject of mindfulness has become quite accepted in psychology. And that comes, as you realize, out of Buddhism. You don't necessarily teach it as a spiritual technique. you teach it as a way of using the mind to overcome certain psychological problems. I remember being at a seminar on mindfulness, and I went up to the presenter at a certain point. He was very well known in the field of mindfulness psychology. And I said, you know that the techniques that you are using are spiritual techniques that are designed to reach the higher level of spirituality and go beyond the personality. And he replied to me, that may be, but we would never talk about it. Well, that's the answer. Yeah. You may be doing some things that are quite spiritually oriented, like guided imagery that I mentioned to you. Yeah, I know in some of your work, you know, Marsha Linehan has been very well accepted for her work with borderline personality, which you've been working with. Well, you know, she's talking about tuning into that wise self. Hey, guess what? That's purely spiritual. She got that from Zen because she studied Zen. And she'll put that out there that she studied Zen.
Back to your personal life, what meditation have given to you?
What? I'm saying, say that again.
What
Yes.
meditation have given to you?
Oh. You know, that's a good question. That's really good. I think about that. And I think I'm calmer. I'm much calmer because I've been at this for almost 40 years now, a very long time. I'm certainly much calmer. I'm much more accepting, I'll call it the big picture of life, that it's all spiritual. Every bit of it is spiritual. And so that helps me to, you know, yeah. One of my previous teachers used to quote Joachul in saying, the accepted disciple is an accepting disciple. The accepted disciple is an accepting disciple. So meditation and spirituality helps you to be accepting. All the bumps, the speed bumps, all the bumps as part of life. This is part of life, to accept them, like my experience on the airplane at 30,000 feet. Hey, you look at your life and accept even your shortcomings when you make a mistake and you hurt, or you hurt somebody else you didn't mean to, but you did. So the spirituality helps you to accept all of these things. It's certainly brought a huge guiding element into my life, being guided, both in my work and just on a daily basis, to be guided and to see the meaning behind things that happen, to you get at the meaning. And so that's been the important part. Things like meeting Kumar, meeting Master Kumar. As somebody come back into my life who had been a companion in a previous life, and learning about them and our companionship together, who we were to each other in the past, that adds a huge amount of meaning, life direction, you know. Coming into the shadow of a great mountain that looks over your shoulder. those things. Everything. Yeah.
Well, as you are a Alice Bailey reader, have you used professionally the 7 rays?
Oh, okay. No, that's a really good question. You know, and I think with a great deal of humility here, I think the 7 rays Okay, let me back up for a minute, Maxime, because Jwalakula, DK, Jwakul, he gave the 5 books on the 7 rays. And if you get into it, you really realize he is laying out what will be a psychology of the future. So to have a great deal of humility about that and realize that we're just starting off on an adventure, a pathway, laying the groundwork for the future. And so I taught the 7 rays in my classes. When I felt comfortable doing it and it felt safe to do that, I would teach the 7 rays. In my meditation groups, I would teach the 7 rays in addition, and help people with a little bit of understanding about the rays. I want to back up a little bit. This is not your question, but I'd asked Master Kumar about my own rays at one point, and he gave me my rays, and that helped me to kind of understand myself a little better, understanding the rays. For you, Maxime, as well, to understand, hey, your rays are going to determine a lot about how you think and about how you work. That's very helpful to know. Getting a feeling, just Maxime, in a very basic way, your clients, your students, are they hard rayed or soft rayed? Because that's very different. Do they tend to be more left brained or right brained? Because that's the rays that are really depending that. That helps you to decide how you're going to approach them. So that's a little bit about it. I don't in my own practice. I'm not capable of saying, okay, this is a 7th ray person. I am going to approach my work with them using the 7th ray. I should, but I'm not there yet. I'm not developed enough. I'm not far enough along to be able to do that. So I don't even try, but I think about the rays. I think about the rays in my work and in my own personal life, that's been helpful. But when we say the rays, the other half of that is esoteric astrology, because that's the other part of the psychology that he was giving out. They are achieved together. I cannot do this. I had a student many years ago now that could look at the astrological chart and determine the soul ray of the person. He knew how the chart pointed, and he derived this from Jwakul's teaching, how it pointed directly at what the soul was and the soul ray was. My friend, you may know Mark Ray, who's a dear friend of mine. Mark uses the astrology in a way that powerfully points at what's going on in the life at a particular moment, or what's about to come, or what the next life period is going to be and what it's going to bring about. Obviously, that can be useful in a counseling role if you can figure out delicately how to do that.
Now, after having lived a so complete and fulfilling career and also spiritual path for so many years, at this stage of your life, what is your goal?
Oh, well, you guys are asking hard questions. Please stop doing that right now. Okay, now. I think about that a lot. The truth of it is I'm very bored with quote unquote retirement, very bored with it. And that's why I want to get back to doing some kind of part-time work in counseling. I do not have the opportunity here that I had in Seattle, where I had so many students that I could work with. And so I'm missing that because there's not a university here that I can work with. The closest major university is in Oregon, and that's Southern Oregon University. And that's why I was pursuing Oregon licensure in the state of Oregon. So perhaps I can pick up some work with students in Southern Oregon. So one of my goals would be, if I could, to do some more service work that it feels right to me. So that's part of it. Yeah. I told you I'm 76. I asked Kumar once in one of his lectures, he said, we need to know when we're going to die. And that's a harsh thing, but it doesn't bother me. That doesn't bother me. So I asked him, when am I going to die? And he wrote me back and he said, well, your 80th year, 80, is going to be difficult. So that's 4 years from now. So I need to squeeze what I can into those 4 years, you know?